Challenges in the present system of education, if you were to implement any of the ideas and ideals of integral education. In simple words, that's the topic. But as I was thinking about what I want to say, we kind of somewhat can guess what are some of the major challenges. And it can be quite a discouraging exercise in some ways to talk about problems, to talk about negative things, talk about difficulties. Here we are trying to learn about something higher, something ideal that would be really good if even trickles of that were to come down to the level of our mainstream education. So why talk about challenges? So as I was thinking about it, I thought maybe I will not speak of challenges. Maybe I will, but let's take a little different approach to those challenges. So I tried to search for some pictures that can be inspiring, uplifting, and at the same time make their own point. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but what words? Which words a picture is worth? So it's up to us. As we look at the pictures, we'll try to make meaning out of those, and in that process, understand or get an idea of those challenges and difficulties. This is a very beautiful picture, right? I think at this point, this time in the afternoon, instead of sitting in a classroom, it might be better to be in a garden like that, experiencing the color, beauty, the fragrance of lavender all around, maybe reading a poem, an old love letter or something like that. So, but instead here we are. That itself could be understood as a challenge. So, why did we put this session? When we know that we should rather be in a garden, why this session? Well, there is a little Zen story where a student asked his master that I'm so discouraged by my own practice of meditation. I can't do anything. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to quieten my mind, how to come up with a sense of peace and silence. So I'm so discouraged. What should I do? The Zen master said, encourage others. So instead of all of us who are concerned with education in whatever capacity, as teachers, as administrators, as parents, as caretakers of children, as anyone, any adult concerned with upbringing and learning and education of a child, we already know what the challenges are, and sometimes that knowledge itself can be discouraging. So if we try to encourage others, maybe in the process we'll forget the challenge and find a sense of motivation and encouragement ourselves. So I'm hoping this session will be something like that. That instead of getting discouraged, we find a renewed sense of encouragement and motivation to, if not necessarily tackle, but to give a different understanding to the word challenge itself and to take some proactive approaches. Nothing says India like peacocks, right? So where did this problem of education in India begin? It was a very deliberate attempt. We have probably all learned in history books. How the British really wanted to rule India, not just geographically, but the Indian mind, through a very deliberate attempt of systematic eradication of indigenous system of education. And anybody who does not believe that should look up the research of one scholar named Mr. Dharampal, a Gandhian scholar who has written a book by the title A Beautiful Tree. And he has amassed historical records from British and Indian archives on how many schools, what kind of schools existed in the late 17th, 18th, 19th century India, and what policies were put together by the British administration to start closing down those schools. And a new system of education was imposed. And instead of going too much into history of what that new system of education was or what was deliberately done. I'm just going to read a few lines from Anand Kumar Swami, who actually said very categorically that of all Indian problems, and this was about 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, when he wrote this, of all Indian problems, the educational is the most difficult and most tragic. And he also said that what this English education, or what this so-called modern, because we in our mind had confused modern education with English or British or Western education. Nothing wrong with being modern. We are living in modern times, whatever modern means. We have to define what modern means. It does not necessarily mean blindly copying any other system. So he talked about that how a single generation of English education has been sufficient to break the threads of Indian tradition and to create a nondescript and superficial being, a sort of intellectual pariah who does not belong to the East or to the West. You understand? Some of you understand Hindi? All of you understand? You know, there is that Hindi word, na ghar ka, na ghat ka. We have not belonged to the East, we have not belonged to the West. We don't know where we are. That's actually quite a serious problem. When we don't know who we are, we cannot solve any problem, right? Whether in our individual life, and here we are talking about the larger educational system. So, in some ways, the challenge began with history. The challenge began with our checkered history of imperialistic, colonialistic rule. Education should be about me, right? I don't know, this picture gives me a sense of freedom. And coming to modern times, this has been the result of all so-called modern system of education that has been imposed. And even after independence since 1947, we have not changed anything. We have just continued with the same system of education and only had 1, 2, 3, 4 commissions. You know, Kothari Commission, this commission, that commission. You know, recently I read something in the Hindu about 2 reports, one from Sam Pitroda and one from someone else, fighting about their interpretations of Kothari Commission report, as if, you know, I don't know, they were just using different terms, but their conclusions were very much the same. I should have brought the editorial. But anyway, the result has been what is very nicely depicted in this picture. You know, typically we understand school with a bunch of desks all lined up neatly in one row, you know, in several rows. Children, students, they see it as a prison house. Parents see it as some kind of a nice resort kind of a place where they send off their kids for 6, 7, 8 hours. Okay, we have let them go. We are relieved, so they must be also enjoying their 8 hours in this nice looking location. For teachers, often students are just like a bunch of sheep who have to be pulled away, you know, led to some destination that teachers think is the right destination. Agree? I don't know, I'm not very technologically savvy. I could not fit this, but you still get the idea. This is some kind of a machine, and here is the input. You know those little kids where it says in? Anyone see it? Kids with big bags being entered into the machine, and the output is kids with little hats and degrees. So the kids are being inputted into a machine, and the graduates from the system are coming out as output. A very mechanistic, mechanical, industrial view of education. And inside the machine, which is called education system, things happen to those children with bags, but these things are sort of distilled out. Creativity, discipline, intelligence. They are not necessarily stay into the machine, they kind of are thrown out of the machine. Creativity is thrown out. Some kind of intelligence, kids are born with a natural intelligence, that is also thrown out. Maybe you can add few other things, a sense of curiosity is also thrown out of the machine because that doesn't stay in the children. What ends up is those little children or whatever 18-year-old high school diploma holders with little hats saying that we have completed our high school or college or BA or MA or PhD or whatever. It can be anything. All is the same. And what's the mantra in this kind of a system? Only one word. You can repeat it 3 times or 3,000 times. Training. It's only training. Education and training are 2 different things. Education comes from the word educe, which means evoke, to bring forth knowledge. Training means when you have to give something, impart something into some object, into some empty vessel. So, what do we train our kids for? We train them for many things, mostly success. We train them for getting high marks. We train them give them formulas so they can actually complete the exam in the allotted time. We train them once they grow up a little bit, go into the job market, we train them for mastering the interview. I have 2 nieces right now slogging out, who have just finished their 12th class exams, and they are slogging out for different kinds of entrance exams, one for engineering and one for bachelor's in English. And I know how they are just struggling, their mothers are taking them from one coaching institute to another coaching institute, shelling out thousands and thousands of rupees. For an 18-year-old kid who doesn't even know whether English honors is something she would like to pursue, just because she has to choose something, okay, I'll do English honors. But we have to train them to secure high marks in the entrance exam so they can get a reasonably good college. And then we train them for getting the promotion if they are in the job market. But all this training, are they still happy? Do we know how to train for happiness? Our system is totally silent on that, so I should be silent too. Another interesting challenge or roadblock in our present system of education is something that Sri Aurobindo mentioned again more than 100 years ago in his essays on national education, where he talked about, and I'm just going to read this full quote. It's a common complaint that our students are too heavily burdened with many subjects, correct? And the studying of many books, right? We saw the picture with big bags. Bags are bigger than the children. The complaint is utterly true, and yet it is equally true that the range of studies is pitifully narrow and the books read miserably few. This is typical Sri Aurobindo. He will not deny anything, but he will be able to show us the truth of everything. Yes, true, too many books are being read, but the range of studies is too narrow. And the books read miserably few. Bags may be big, but bags may be full of notebooks, notes, all those notes that you can buy these days. Previous CBSE's question papers, preparatory kind of books, worksheets, this, that, all for that training model. Not for learning, not for evoking knowledge, but for training, for securing high marks. So the complaint is true, and yet it is equally true that the range of studies is pitifully narrow. What is the reason of this paradox? The justification of these 2 apparently contradictory truths. I have often facilitated an online course on integral education. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Sri Aurobindo because it really leads to a very interesting discussion in the online forum. And maybe this is something you can start discussing among yourselves in your schools. Just this question, what is the reason for this paradox and the justification of these 2 apparently contradictory truths? There are, you understand, contradictory truths. Bags are big, but books read are very few. We don't have time to go into this discussion, but just reflecting on this question can really help us understand what is wrong with our system. And when we get tired of reflection, we go to comics. And sometimes Dilbert has the right answer. let's see. I don't know, I like Dilbert comic strips. So, this is, if you can, I can just explain what's going on here. So that's our Dilbert talking to his boss. There is a huge disconnect between my enormous technical knowledge and the trivial tasks you assign to me. So this is a disgruntled employee complaining to his boss, right? I have enormous technical knowledge, but the tasks that you've given me are really too trivial for me. So the boss says, that's a temporary situation, Ashok. He says, okay, good. Eventually your technical skills will become outdated. Right? It is a temporary problem because your skills will become outdated. This is what is going on in our present system of education. We are giving them technical skills that are only good for securing marks. Think about it. This is my personal experience, after I come out of the examination hall, when I was in 12th or even BA, up to my MA level, 2 or 3 days after you ask me, I don't remember anything, right? I couldn't even recall what was going on. Last summer, one of my nieces who just finished her 12th class, one of her subjects in 12th class was economics, and I have a master's in economics. And I used to teach economics in high school. I taught for 5-6 years. And she said, okay, Masi, I want to brush up my economics. I'm going to come to Pondicherry and stay with you for 2 weeks. I said, good, come. And I tell you, I had to revise her economics textbooks for at least 3 weeks before she came, and I could only do 3 or 4 chapters with her. Because it was so difficult for me to recall all those concepts. What is wrong with us? How are we taught that we can't retain what is worth retaining? We only retain up to the point where we have to reproduce it in the exam. So, it's this nature of that education has actually taken the form of technical skill, which eventually becomes outdated. After I've written the exam, I don't need this knowledge, so it just goes out of my memory. And if you read more into the literature on integral education, Sri Aurobindo talks about active and passive mental faculties, and what's the passive memory, what is the active memory, how does it work. You know, there's a whole psychology. But our teacher, education programs, which are also called teacher training programs, right? Teacher training institutes don't go into that kind of detailed psychology of how human mind works, how things can be retained in the memory for a longer time. But, so we move on. Another challenge which we again know all very well is the challenge of size. We say our class size is too big. How can we implement any new idea when we have 50 students? Pretty much most of the schools. I grew up in Delhi, and every time I go there when I have discussion with my nieces and nephews, all their schools, they have 47, 50, 55 children in each section with 10, 12, 15 sections for each class. 8 class would have from 8 to 10, things like that. How can you remember those names? I had an experience of teaching an undergraduate class last semester with 120 students. I couldn't remember each of their names. I told them the first day, don't expect me to remember their names. I used to call upon them by the color of their t-shirt. Yellow t-shirt, this one sitting with the yellow t-shirt, something like that. How can you recall? How can you remember their names? What's this system about? So, size is a big challenge, we all know that. And sometimes, size also means that there isn't enough classroom space. Especially in rural areas, there is not enough space for children. Shape is also a challenge. How so? Think about what this image is trying to say. Yes?
Shaping each child.
Or not, or forcing the child to be shaped into the shape that the teacher has in mind. Teacher apparently loves the shape square, so she is putting everybody into a square box. teacher might feel so convinced because she after all or he after all is a product of that same system. So we can't blame the teachers. Obviously, testing is a big challenge. We like to test. I think both pictures are self-explanatory. Right? The first one is interesting. You had to, apparently this poor Brahmin kid had to tie his shikha so that he won't fall asleep on his book while reading. That's concentration, one way to concentrate. And this little girl of modern times, again has to, she's put this little bandana, like she's going to fight with the exam, because she's going to get that A grade. So that's a big challenge. Everybody likes to test. The system wants teachers, schools to test. Parents want schools to test their kids to see how they are doing. So basically the focus in our education system has been on only one aspect. That's the mental education. I think probably by now you have already come across that in integral education there are several aspects of education. We call it a five-fold education: physical education, vital education, mental education, psychic and spiritual education. Psychic and spiritual may be a little too much to expect from the system. Let's just talk about, and forget physical and vital also. If the system could even do a good job with mental education, it's still worth some cheering up. A good mental education, actually in one of her writings, the mother had given 5 key aspects of a good mental education. And maybe in the next few days, if you get a chance in one of your sessions, you can have some discussion on that. What are those 5 aspects, key aspects of mental education that mother had talked about? But in one of his writings, Sri Aurobindo talked about what a good mental education should be about. Very briefly, he said, a good mental education must help the child develop 3 things, what he called as the 3 great manipulating faculties. What are those 3 great manipulating faculties? Power of reasoning, power of comparison and differentiation, and the power of expression. Power of reasoning, to be able to reason out and live the life in a rational approach. Power of comparison and differentiation, which eventually leads to power of discernment, which is a very important life skill to know what is the right thing to do and what is wrong, what is good, what is bad for me, those kinds of things. And power of expression, to be able to communicate through oral expression, verbal expression, written expression, through painting, through drawing, through poetry, through whatever form of expression one can take. He talked about these 3 great manipulating, and he used the term as 3 great manipulating faculties. But our system presently focuses only on the opposite of that, which is the passive faculties, memory, rote memory, and then reproduce it, keep it only to the point where you actually need it to. It's like, I hate to use the expression, it's like vomiting it out for the test and then forgetting about it. But, Sri Aurobindo being Sri Aurobindo, he would also tell us in a different context that as good as this power of reason is, it can also be a problem for us. We can also use our reason to justify anything we want. This is also part of our human psychology that we have to slowly, as educators, begin to understand. We can always reason out our preferences and say, this is correct because my reason tells me so. That's why the word manipulation is actually so beautiful, so appropriate here. You can use your reason to manipulate the meaning. So reason is good, like what he said. Reason is the helper and reason is the bar. Reason is good to to develop power of reasoning is good, but we should also know that there may be powers beyond the power of reasoning. That is why the psychic and spiritual aspects of education are also equally important, which the system doesn't even address. To high intellectual stuff. So a little bit comic relief. This again will help us understand how power of reasoning can be also misused. Again, Dilbert to rescue. So the employer is conducting an interview and he's asking the candidate, I ask all prospective employees this question to test their reasoning. Right? So the system should help develop the power of reasoning. Fair, it's quite fair for employers to judge the employee's power of reasoning. So here is the question he puts. You have 1 fox and 2 chickens that you need to get across a river. You can only take one at a time in the rowboat. The fox will eat the chickens if left alone. So that's the problem. So the candidate says, I would buy livestock insurance, then barbecue the chickens and blame the fox. And the interviewer says, can you start today? Perfectly reasonable answer. Perfect power of reasoning applied. But what is missing is power of comparison and differentiation. He has other 2 powers totally aced. Reasoning is also good and power of expression is also very good. But the power of comparison and differentiation, eventually the power of discernment, is totally missing. But the job is done. So he gets his job or promotion or whatever, and everybody goes home happy. Nothing changes. Really nothing changes. History always repeats itself till the time we actually learn from history. So the picture number 1 is from an early 19th century school in continental United States. And the picture number 2 is a much more recent picture in a small town in India. Things are pretty much the same. Children are not literally, but somewhat tied to their desks. And all the eyes are towards the teacher, the giver of the information, and the children are all apparently taking in the information. So we all agree that we don't want the same thing. We want to change. Right? Anybody in the room who would say, we don't need to change anything in the education system? I don't think so. Anybody who would say? But what kind of change is required? All those commissions would have their own ideas, what kind of changes are required. But ultimately, nothing actually changes. The more things change, the more they stay the same, as they say. So we basically have really no idea what to change and how to change the system. As an example, remember the first thing I said, that going back into the history, we can say many of the problems in Indian education system started historically as a result of imposing this English system of education. And one aspect of imposition of that system was English as a language. Both learning as a language, as a medium of instruction, and as a medium of instruction. And at one point of time, there were people arguing we should not be learning English, we should not be talking in English, because English is the language of colonial masters, we will lose our tradition, this, that, we will lose our culture. All valid points, and yet we are also in the times where we have a very big voluntary organization running its centers in many places in India called Teach India. And their only mission is to help kids learn English. You go onto their website, it's a Times of India, Times Group initiative. Tens of thousands of volunteers, well-educated, young children, young adults are volunteering their time and effort in this initiative to help kids from underprivileged rural background to learn and to polish their English speaking skills so that they can get good jobs and come up on the socio-economic ladder. And our young dynamic MP, Mr. Shashi Tharoor, has been on record of saying that learning English should not be the privilege of a few. So, English as the language of colonial masters and English as the means to remove us from our tradition, from our culture, is absolutely correct. And what Mr. Tharoor is saying is also absolutely correct. Sri Aurobindo was expert in so many different languages, Indian and European, and he chose to write all his works in this beautiful English language. He gave a different, he took English language to a different level, to a higher level. It's not that he didn't know that English was also the means of colonial masters to remove us from the language, and yet he chose English to be his language of his expression. So why this? All of these truths exist at the same time. Well, we're talking about change. One of the big changes that have happened in the recent maybe 20, 30 years or so is technology. This is how classrooms look like in very elite urban schools, schools and colleges. Does this future look any better? Just kids with laptops? We are again training human things to master the machines, kind of making them masters of machine rather than masters of themselves. So with all of this sort of a discouraging view so far, what can be done? What really needs to be changed? Let's remove the focus from the problems to really and bring it to a little bit in the direction of what can we really do. Well, there was once a time in India where the leading thought was that if you only know your own culture, if you only know your own cultural tradition, you really don't know anything. So that time the Indian understanding was, what does he know who knows only his own tradition? This was a time when India was intellectually vibrant, intellectually confident. And if you read Foundations of Indian Culture of Sri Aurobindo, you really get a sense of when that time existed in India. And sadly, today we are at a point where we could even ask, what does he know who does not even know his own tradition? This has been the effect of our education. It has really removed us from knowing ourselves, from knowing our own tradition. Tradition is not something that you put in a box. Tradition is something that you live day in and day out. When we don't even know our own cultural tradition, when we don't even know our own culture, we really don't know anything. So, here are the core questions that we should be asking. Asking ourselves and then asking of the education system of which we all are a part of. But sadly, all our Kotharis and Sam Pitrodas and all the big guys who are charged with big budget commissions don't ask these questions. And that's why nothing changes. We only get from the classrooms of benches and chairs we only give laptops. That's the only change that happens. And then we keep debating whether or not to teach English. But we don't ask the key questions. What does it really mean to be a human being? And what is the purpose of human life? Because until we ask this question, we do not know what should be the purpose of education that should help a human being work towards that ultimate purpose of human life? This is the key question. And unless we ask ourselves as adults, as individuals, we cannot ask this of the system. So, what is the purpose of my life? And how is education, how is my own learning process helping me in fulfilling that purpose of life? So what's the aim of life and the aim of true education? Because ultimately, the various philosophies of education are nothing but a reflection of how we understand these two key questions. So what does India say about these two key questions? Let's see. And these are again words from Sri Aurobindo from his various writings. Actually, the second one is from one of the writings of the Mother. India has always seen in the individual a soul, a portion of the divinity enwrapped in mind and body, a conscious manifestation in nature of the universal self and spirit. Integral education is actually based on this conception of man. Sounds a little too high-sounding, but it's actually very simple if you look at the words again. From an Indian point of view, the individual is first and foremost a soul. Enwrapped, just like you wrap something. Enwrapped in the outer, which is mind and body. A conscious manifestation of the universal self and spirit. Universal self. The universal self has consciously chosen to manifest itself in each one of us in this world of nature. So each one of us is at the core a soul, a conscious manifestation of that larger universal self. If we accept this truth of who we are, individually first and then collectively, whether as a family, as a school, as a community, as a society, as a nation. Imagine the change that can happen. And people will say, what does accepting this truth mean? Well, ultimately it would mean realizing your soul, experiencing the soul. That may not happen in this lifetime for most of us. That may not happen in the next 10 lifetimes for most of us. But at least intellectually we can start accepting that ultimately I am a soul. Mind and body are only the outer instruments. And once this intellectual acceptance happens, and once we are consciously trying to get a glimpse of that deeper me, with the grace of the larger spirit, maybe off and on I may get momentary in touch with that higher, sweeter thing in me. It happens, when sometimes when we are in the middle of that nature, think of that first picture. Imagine yourself in a garden with beautiful lavender and beautiful breeze and trees and all that. Just for a split second you may forget everything and be totally calm and totally peace. Maybe at that moment you are experiencing the true self in you. We can't say with surety, not through our minds of course, but at least the experience is true. Have you had those moments? Sometimes while listening to some very inspiring piece of music it happens. Sitting quietly having a cup of tea in a room just by yourself and some nice music playing in the background. It could happen. Right? We all have had those moments, but we just choose to ignore the deeper impact that those moments could have. If we consciously try to have more and more of those moments, who knows? This intellectual truth can actually become lived truth for us most of the times. So unless we accept this truth and base our education system on this idea of what an individual is, nothing really can change. According to this concept of who I am or what I am, what should be the aims of education? Three simple aims. Well, they sound simple, but they are not really simple. See, for Sri Aurobindo, education is not only about an individual. Education is also about the collective. Education is also about a nation, and education is also about the larger world, the humanity itself. So he has given three key aims of integral education. One for the individual, one for the nation, and one for the humanity. He's concerned about everyone and everything. For the individual, he says it's the growth of soul and its powers and possibilities. Remember, soul is the one that is enwrapped in mind and body. So the powers of the soul are the powers of mind and body. So education for an individual should be about the growth of powers of the soul. So all the vital, mental, physical education ultimately should be helping you grow in your soul, because you are developing the powers of the soul, the instruments of the soul, right? So when a child is being encouraged to write poetry or to draw a painting or to draw a picture or do painting or write an essay or write a beautiful piece of prose, it's the powers of the soul that are being expressed and that are being developed and refined. So the task may be the same, but the attitude with which you do the task changes. So the key lies in changing the attitude. You're seeing, it's the same thing, but you're beginning to see what needs to be changed. The change has to happen in our attitude. For the nation, the aim of education should be the preservation, strengthening and enrichment of the nation's soul and its dharma. Well, we will do that if we knew what is the dharma of our nation and what is the soul of our nation. So that in itself can be a good exercise for an education system, one of these commissions to explore what is the soul of Indian nation and what is the dharma of Indian nation, which our system should help preserve, enrich and strengthen. I would like to see a commission like that. I may even like to be a part of that commission, which would try to explore something like that. Well, we'll see. And ultimately for the humanity, the aim of education should be to raise both the individual as well as the nation into powers of life and ascending mind and soul of humanity. See, the individual is part of humanity, but nation is the link through which individual is connected with the larger world. So our activists always say we have to become global citizens. My challenge is, have we become Indian citizens first? Have we even become a true individual first? Unless we do that, how can I become a global citizen? How can I have an empathy for somebody living in some place in Zaire and sign a petition on change.org when I don't even know what I am? So, but ultimately education has to slowly help the child widen his or her mental outlook so that he or she begins to see himself as a part of the larger humanity. So that's why the focus on world literature is always good. Talking about art, the school of art from various places, not just European art, but Indian art, or art from Eastern Europe or art from Western Europe, all kinds of things is important. And exposure to different cultural ways of life in various parts of the world, it's all very good. World history, world geography, learning all of that is very good with the attitude that it's actually helping the individual connect with the life and mind of the humanity. Again, the change is in the attitude, why we are doing it. Most of the time as teachers we are not given an opportunity to even reflect on why we are doing, why to teach this subject. If we start asking ourselves this question, things begin to change. And while doing all this, education should never forget, never lose sight of the highest object of man's life, which is the awakening and development of his spiritual being. Well, I am not going to go into this because it's really, I have just a little bit of time left as to, this is too big a goal. But if we can even take up the first one, for the individual, what should be the goal of education? We may have made some dent into the education system. And Sri Aurobindo, again being Sri Aurobindo, he will not let us be discouraged. We were just talking about all the grand names. Then he will, somewhere in his writings, you will find something and he'll say, okay, if you can do this, you might have solved something. And for him, it's very simple. In one of his letters to his younger brother, he had written, India's problem is not that we are not spiritual. Spirituality we have enough. What we don't have enough is ability to think. He called it that India's problem is thought phobia. He wrote that in 1910, I believe, maybe a little earlier than that. That still holds true today. We do not know how to think. We don't like to think. We just accept and move on. So he says that our first necessity, if India is to survive, remember it's a question of our survival now. If India is to survive and do her appointed work in the world, is that the youth of India should learn to think on all subjects, to think independently. That's the key. He didn't put it in highlight, I highlighted it, I bolded it. Going to the heart of things, not stopped by their surface. Does our system encourage students, forget students, encourage teachers to think? We are the youth of India, we are not police. Do we think independently, or do we only accept what our B.Ed and M.Ed curriculum and our teacher training programs tell us to do that? You are here attending a workshop on integral education. Don't accept anything without questioning. Question. You may not have time in the allotted session times to question your facilitator, but ask yourself, why should I accept what they are telling me? I should do my own research. I should read up on my own. I should see whether it's actually working, what is not working, why. Then only I will accept this. Would you have the time and patience and interest to do it? Each one of you will have to ask this question and come up with your own answer. Sri Aurobindo gave 3 principles of true education. I'll start with the third one. It said, from near to far. What's nearest to me? Nearest to me is me. I'll start with myself. Teaching the youth how to think independently should start with learning myself to think independently. So, from near to far, start with myself. Knowing myself is the key. Knowing oneself is the key to address the challenges, to address the problems. Mother had talked about this many times. If you look at her volume 12, in her collected volumes, in her notes and answers to the teachers, she always, you get the sense, this point is being emphasized again and again. Look within. Ask yourself this, what have you done that your kids are not being disciplined in your class? Where is your level of consciousness that things are not working? Why aren't kids doing the homework? Ask yourself this. That's a very difficult thing. And the more we adults, as parents and as educators can know, and the more we become master of ourselves, the better we will be at helping others, facilitating others to learn. But this is a very difficult journey. To be aware of exactly what is going on in me. That's why it's called tapasya. It's hard. It takes a lot of effort. But that's the only way we can change anything, by changing ourselves. So the long and difficult road of self-mastery begins with getting to know more about ourselves. And there are some exercises that can be designed and developed for teachers to know more about themselves. What's my temperament? What kind of, am I more of a Rajasic person or a Tamasic person, or more of a Rajasic, Tamasic person, or a Rajasic, Sattvic person? What's my learning style? What encourages me? When do I feel motivated? When do I feel discouraged? When do I feel more depressed? They say depression and anger are kind of two sides of the same coin. Am I more of an angry person, or am I a person who gets easily into depression? So knowing more and more of this kind of our psychological makeup will help us gain mastery over ourselves. And understanding the way my own mind works, understanding my own mindset. I'm going to again use pictures. Do I believe that learning cannot be fun? Do I believe that education is a serious business, there is no place for fun? Or do I actually believe that there could be creative ways to teach the same content and make it more fun and more inviting for the students, whichever level they are, from kindergarten to 12th to college level, or what have you. I watch movies. I haven't been watching recently, but I enjoy watching movies. All movies, give me any language, as long as they have Hindi or English subtitles, I can watch them. But sometimes I watch them as my research. I tell myself this is my research as to how the current popular cultural mindset is being shaped. It's not always good, but it's just my way of telling myself that it's a good way to learn about what the youth are being exposed to, and then maybe 6 months, 8 months, 10 months down the line, I might find good use of. In that movie, there was that particular clip or that particular song, and then I will go to YouTube and download it, and Miresh is, my evidence for that. I used to send links to Miresh, please download this video, that video, so that I can use it in my class or something like that. So, who knows? If we are open to the idea that learning can also be fun, music can also be used to teach mathematics or geography, dance can also be used to teach English, who knows? If we are open to this kind of experimentation, things can change. Very small, but that's the only change that lasts, that starts from the individual. The second picture I just recently found it. I changed it just yesterday. I had a different quote. But then I thought this picture says this better. The moment I saw this picture, I thought, oh my gosh, imagine if my school library were arranged like this. We have those boring round bookshelves. I have white shelves in my house, to put my books in. But if I can get my husband to agree, maybe the next bookshelf will be something like this. I know it's not going to happen, too much work. But imagine in an institution, in a school, if we had a library like this, wouldn't kids be encouraged to go? Or they might be discouraged, oh my God, I cannot take out the book because her eyeball would pop out. Right? That I should not take out that book. But those could be maybe fake books, so that eyes could still remain. But just as a way to encourage, to make learning, to make schools, to make libraries an inviting place. It doesn't take too much effort. For my home it will take too effort because my husband and I are lazy. But if a school would do this would be such a great project to involve kids, to design a bookshelf like that. Piece of art and a nice looking library. What is this? Yeah. Right. It's just a leaf. investment to get kids excited, to get learners excited about learning. You want to create a piece of art? Take a nice looking leaf and put it on a piece of cemented ground. What you are teaching learners is to imagine, to create, to see deeply, to see closely. Forget children, start with me, start with myself. Do I look closely at things? Do I see deeply? Can I imagine? Can I create? Not create something else? Am I open to recreating myself? You know, the picture on the right is actually, the brush is creating an image. The artist is sort of creating herself. And the picture on the left is something my husband took, just a piece of bougainvillea leaf. It's those little, what's the technical
Falling grains.
No, it's the botanical name for those stamens inside the leaf, inside the flower. Stamen, right?
Actually, that is like these.
Yeah, but that's inside the leaf. Pollen grains, whatever they are, right? Whatever the biological term is, the botanical term is. But what does it look like?
Two human beings talking to each other.
Yeah, or doing something, praying. When he showed me this picture, he immediately titled it as an offering. See, Mother had given the significance of protection to bougainvillea. The spiritual significance of bougainvillea is protection. This is an offering. When he looked at, took this picture and then he immediately titled it offering. Because to him, those two individual human beings were one was offering oneself or something to the other. And he shared it with few friends, and his friend who was familiar with the mother's significance of protection, he wrote back saying, is it an offering of protection? So it's, we don't have to make huge changes in the system all of a sudden. We just have to start changing the way we see things. And slowly, through our example, help learners see things a little differently, see things a little bit more deeply. Because ultimately, like someone said, when you teach, you basically learn twice. When one person teaches, two people learn, the teacher and the learner. Because ultimately, what Sri Aurobindo said, the first principle of education is that nothing can be taught. Sri Aurobindo is my most favorite author, for sure. And another favorite author is Oscar Wilde, for some reason, the Irish writer, playwright. And I don't know how many times I've read his plays and his, the controversial novel also, and certainly his humorous plays, The Ideal Husband and all that. Lady Windermere's fan, you just keep laughing reading his play. And one of his quotes that I really like is also, says exactly like Sri Aurobindo. And I mean, when I read that, I told myself, this is the reason why I like both of them equally. I can be reading Sri Aurobindo on one side, and as a break from serious reading of Sri Aurobindo, I picked one of the humorous writings of Oscar Wilde. And in one of his essays, he talks about that education is a good thing, but from time to time it is important to remember that nothing worth knowing can ever be taught. And when I saw that, and I said, isn't that a great coincidence? How great minds would think, There is a Mahayogi and here is a humorous, funny, controversial playwright born in two different cultures and saying the same thing. Nothing really worth knowing can ever be taught. So, with that, I will end. And I don't know if we have time, but that's it. Nothing really can be taught. So, what are the challenges? Ask yourself that. We are the challenge. I am the challenge myself. What can I do to remove that challenge? authorities will not help. We have to help ourselves. Any questions? Quick questions. So why really this session? Just to stay encouraged. Any questions? Thoughts? Think, do not accept anything I said. Come on, there has to be at least one question. Can I just check it? I have to go for my own class, so as a student. Not that anything can be taught, but it's a group of people I like to go and, we read a little bit of Sri Aurobindo, so. But I still have a few more minutes, so if there is anything anybody would like to share, comment.
Can you suggest some piece of share
His,
which is kind of easy to read
yeah.
and very helpful?
Something on education, you mean? Okay, yeah, his essays from volume 1, Collected Works, volume 1, his essays on education, national education are very good. And then his essays on art, national value of art. We said the education of art and music. When you remove art and music from education, you remove the soul of the education. So something like that. He didn't say it exactly like that, but so national value of art. Certainly, from an education point of view, these essays are very good. And Mother's Collected Works, volume 12, because it is arranged, it is organized very nicely. You can read different sections. So her advice to the teachers, her letters to students, to group monitors and things like that. So those are also very easy to read. But sometimes what I find helpful is to just take one or two key passages and contemplate on that, rather than reading the full essays and not getting anything out of it. But read again. Ultimately, wherever they have to go, the truth, it goes in. And then later on it comes out.
So where Sri Aurobindo is concerned, what she is saying, this method works better. That you don't first of all try to read too much. It's difficult to assimilate. You read a little and then kind of be relaxed if you are not understanding. I'm saying this because I have been very agitated. And it makes you somehow feel, are you a fool or a stupid that he writes for whom? I am a person, I am a teacher, I am trying to do something which I feel is worth doing, what Mother has said, Sri Aurobindo has said, or what are the true principles of education, but still I don't understand. This is when I was younger. But the only way, as she says, is that you read and then just be relaxed. Think somewhere, percolate, and as she said, read twice, thrice, and when you start understanding a little, you start getting the rasa of it. And then, you go back to it. You really go back to it. That's something really. I'd like to just say that I sat through the whole paper because I had time now. We all had our tea. Beautiful paper. And she has that knack of presenting it so beautifully through the technology. In your school, you have that in every class. She has touched upon what was very nice, must have been nice for you also, because she has touched upon quite many things that we have been speaking since yesterday. So they were a kind of a repetition, but very well put, with so many of her new ways of presentation, which is absolutely beautiful. She is a wonderful teacher, and her expression is so flawless, so beautiful, that many of those things and so many other things, especially making that comic picture, or that this thing, what is it here, Mr. Gilbert?
Gilbert.
Gilbert was very
Gilbert.com.
interesting. I
Lot of
don't
learning
know
there.
all these things, I never get into all these things. She's the master of all these things. And she takes out clips from films and songs and this makes beautiful presentation. And then that beautiful thing of that, spitting out the creative thinking, the originality and all that from the stuff's not interested, and the child going like this and coming out. Beautifully done, very beautifully done. And so well incorporating the whole thing. It was a beautiful, complete thing. Beloo. Thank you, dear. So beautiful, so beautiful. Very nice. She's a bit in a hurry, meeting also. She won't be able to take any more questions today, but you can always, I give you the email, you can always communicate with her, because it will be worth keeping in touch with her. She's great in this field of education. As a teacher and knowledge bank. Wonderful, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to rush. I have to go for my class and then I have to, I'm going out tomorrow morning for 2 days. So. Thank you for being such patient listeners.